The first guys we have to talk about are the guys who I've grouped together as the number one overall pick contenders. So these are the guys who I would feel comfortable, or I would not look at you funny if you took number one overall. They are Jahmyr Gibbs of the Lions, Bijan Robinson of the Falcons, Puka Nacua of the Rams, and Ja'Marr Chase of the Bengals. Now, some of you might be surprised at the exclusion of Jackson Smith-Njigba from this group. However, I'm just a little bit concerned about JSN's production this year with the loss of Clint Kubiak. I think that last year was, could be considered a little bit of an outlier year. JSN saw an absurd amount of target share, and I just worry that if the offense takes a step back this season without Clint Kubiak, JSN could suffer a little bit. I do still think he's a very good fantasy pick, but I have him in the next group after this. But getting back to the guys who are actually here, my 101, the top guy on my board, is Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that the loss of David Montgomery will really just open up things for Jahmyr Gibbs, because he's not going to be splitting the workload with a guy who, honestly, David Montgomery produced RB1 numbers for the last 2 years. At least 2 years ago, he definitely did. And I think with those numbers presumably going to Jahmyr Gibbs, because I'm not really scared of the other guy they brought in to be the backup behind Jahmyr Gibbs, Isaiah Pacheco, I think Jahmyr Gibbs to the moon, honestly, is a perfectly fair presumption. However, Bijan Robinson, the other running back in this group, I think is also a very fair pick. I think he's really good. I think he has a high amount of pass catching upside. I think he's a really dynamic player. I think he always is threatening to rip off a 50-yard touchdown at any moment. I think he's the premier weapon in his offense, and I wouldn't hate it if you took him number one overall. But I do think I like Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit more, just because we've seen what Bijan Robinson has been doing these last 2 seasons in Atlanta, and I think the loss of Tyler Algier, his backup, isn't going to be as significant as the loss of David Montgomery for Jahmyr Gibbs. I think we've seen what Bijan Robinson can be in Atlanta. I think we have not yet seen the peak of Jahmyr Gibbs in the National Football League. So that's why I have Jahmyr Gibbs above Bijan Robinson. But if you like Bijan Robinson more because of some specific stat, I can't fault you for it. After these two guys, we have 2 wide receivers, Puka and Ja'Marr. And on my board, I'm always taking the 2 running backs ahead of the 2 wide receivers. However, if you wanted to take a receiver, especially in a PPR league, number 1 overall, I wouldn't blame you. But me personally, I'm always clearing the 2 running backs first before the receivers. With these 2 guys, the receivers, I don't really think there's a difference between them. I think you can take Puka or Ja'Marr depending on what you want. I think Puka has more PPR upside because of his high reception volume, but I think Ja'Marr has less injury concern than Puka, so I think they're about on the same tier. Me personally, I think I would go Puka just because I think the PPR upside is just so much better. It's just significantly better than Ja'Marr, just with how many targets Puka sees per game. But, Ja'Marr is also probably one of still an elite receiver. So either way, I think they're both picks. I would take the running backs before them, but especially in PPR, if you wanted to take a receiver number 1 overall, I think it's fine. But for me personally, the order for these 4 guys would be Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Puka Nacua, Ja'Marr Chase. And these guys I think should always come off the board as the first 4 players. Next up, we got a group of 6 guys who should, in my opinion, fill out the next spots in the first round. They just aren't as good as the top 4 guys. And that is JSN, Jonathan Taylor, Amon-Ra St. Brown, James Cook, CMC, and Nico Collins. To start off with JSN, I've already said my pitch on JSN. He was the wide receiver 2 last year. He was an elite fantasy asset. He's in an offense with very little target competition. He should continue to dominate that target competition. I'm just a little concerned about the loss of Clint Kubiak. Clint Kubiak is very clearly a great offensive mind, and his loss could cause a sizable regression for the Seahawks offense. I'm not saying it will, but it could. And if it does, JSN's production could be hurt. And I don't think you have those questions in terms of offensive regression with Puka and Ja'Marr Chase, because they've maintained continuity with their offensive play callers from last season to this season. So JSN, great player. A little bit of questions about what the offense is going to look like this year, but nothing significant to where, once the pick reads 105, once you're at the 5th overall pick, I'm perfectly comfortable taking JSN. Same thing with Jonathan Taylor. I'm also comfortable taking him as soon as the top 4 guys are off the board. We saw last year for the first half of the season, he was the fantasy MVP. Fell off a bit when his quarterback got hurt. Now that his quarterback's coming back from an injury, we have questions about how this offense is going to look with a quarterback who already was kind of mediocre coming off of a major injury. But if the quarterback bounces back, Daniel Jones, we could very quickly see this offense get back on track and could see Jonathan Taylor put up elite numbers once again. However, keeping him out of the top guys, questions about his offense. Next up, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's my wide receiver 3. I have him above JSN, but I know that's kind of a controversial take, so in this video I've ranked him below him. But I think that Amon-Ra St. Brown has just shown repeatedly his ability to just knock out, 1,300 plus yard seasons. He's the only receiver to be top 3 in receiving yards the past 3 seasons. And I just think that there's no reason, he is a safe pick. Maybe he has capped upside because the Lions have a lot of other weapons in their offense that are going to steal yards, targets, touchdowns from Amon-Ra St. Brown, while other guys like JSN and Ja'Marr Chase are either clearly the alpha or have no competition. But I just think Amon-Ra is a safe pick, and if I get him in the middle of the first round, I'm feeling really good about locking down my wide receiver 1 position. Next up, James Cook. He's just a good player. He's constantly overlooked. I know Josh Allen is the engine for the Buffalo Bills offense, but James Cook is like the gasoline that gets put in the engine. He's so good. He has receiving upside. He scores so many touchdowns. Last year, we were worried about touchdown regression. It just didn't happen. It's so clear now that James Cook, Joe Brady, and the Buffalo Bills offense just want to give James Cook the ball in the red zone. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that James Cook, he might have a capped upside because Josh Allen also runs for a bunch of touchdowns. But I think that he's also, kind of like Amon-Ra St. Brown, a very stable first-round pick. He's a guy who, he might have a few bust weeks. I think that he's shown that he's not, there might be weeks where you're looking at under 10 PPR points. But I think he also has the upside of putting up 25 points on any given week. So I like James Cook as a first-round pick. I'm definitely feeling a little less secure in the first round if I come out with James Cook, but I do think that he has a lot more stability than some of the guys below him, and because of that, I think he deserves to be ranked higher. Next up, Christian McCaffrey. I personally am not touching Christian McCaffrey this year. He deserves to be in the first round because of what he did last year and what the 49ers seem to want to do with him, which is give him every touch they can and throw the ball to him behind the goal line every other play. But I'm just concerned about the number of touches we saw last year. We saw 2 years ago Saquon Barkley have an ungodly number of touches, come back the following year, struggle because his body was broken down. And we're talking about a 31-year-old running back who has an injury history and who has been basically ran into the ground by any franchise who has ever had the luxury of owning him. So I think Christian McCaffrey is a first-round talent. I personally am just going to be happy that I drafted him last year and just say, you know what? If someone else wants to take that risk of drafting Christian McCaffrey and have the risk of him either, spontaneously combusting at some point and picking up a season-ending injury, or having him just be mid because his efficiency kind of took a nosedive last year as the year went on, that's on you. If you want to take that bet and it pays off, you know what? Good for you. I'm going to go safe. I'm going to go with safer first-round pick because you need to nail your first-round pick. So Christian McCaffrey, good fantasy player. Questions about things that could drag him down this season. Lastly, Nico Collins. I think he's just a good player. He's in an offense there. Yeah, there's questions about his quarterback. But we saw last year that when he was healthy, regardless of the fact that C.J. Stroud and the Texans' offense was kind of mid, Nico Collins produced. He's the clear alpha in his receiving room. Yeah, some people like I like Jaden Higgins coming out as a, emerging wide receiver 2. Tank Dell is coming back, but I don't think he'll be significant this year because of the leg injury. I think Nico Collins will very clearly be the alpha in this offense. C.J. Stroud's in a must-do-or-die year with his future on the Texans. I think Nico Collins is in for a pretty big year as a result of that, and I feel really good if I get him at the back half of the first round. He's definitely a guy who I would take after definitely JSN, JT, Amon-Ra, and James Cook. maybe after CMC, depending on if I decide I want to do CMC. But Nico Collins is the guy who I definitely think I'm taking in the first round if he's available. Next group of guys are the borderline first rounders. And these are guys who, if you take them in the first round, you're feeling pretty good about it. But there is a little nagging voice in the back of your head that is kind of saying, well, what if this happens? All of these guys has a but what if that kind of drags them down a little bit. But these guys are CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Drake London, Amon-Ra, Ashton Jeanty, Devon Achane, and George Pickens. So just to start with CeeDee Lamb, CeeDee Lamb's an elite receiver. We've seen him do it for year over year. The main reason I feel less comfortable about CeeDee Lamb than a lot of people do is just because of the other guy who's I have in this tier, George Pickens. A lot of people don't have George Pickens as a first rounder. I do. And the reason is you look at what happened last year, and I think these guys are just going to be the wide receiver equivalent of the Detroit Lions run game for the past couple years, where CeeDee Lamb is Jahmyr Gibbs, and George Pickens is David Montgomery. Except I think George Pickens is going to be even better than David Montgomery, to the point where I think both of these guys are on an even playing field when it comes to fantasy outlook. And because of that, I don't feel comfortable having them farther apart than a slot or two. I have CeeDee Lamb ranked slightly higher in my rankings than George Pickens, but at the end of the day, I think that they're very close together, and I don't think either one of them is going to separate out from the other as a much better fantasy asset. So because of that, if I'm going to put CeeDee Lamb in the borderline first rounder, I feel like I have to put George Pickens in here too. And that's kind of just the downside case for both of them, is I don't think either one of them will be able to separate out as, this receiver who's going to have 1,700 yards or something, because I think they're going to keep each other in check to where maybe they just both have, 1,300, 1,400 yards. But at the end of the first round, you're pretty happy with that if that's the fantasy output you're getting. So I like CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, but I think they're going to cuck each other all season. Next up is Justin Jefferson. He's possibly the best wide receiver in the league. Still don't love the quarterback outlook. They bring in Kyler Murray, a guy who is good but has never been a great passing quarterback. He did help DeAndre Hopkins to a very good fantasy season in 2021, but we haven't seen that recently. He's been good, but last year the real elite passing numbers came when Jacoby Brissett was under center. So I like Justin Jefferson, the talent, and I think he's absolutely going to talent his way to good weeks. But I am just a little concerned about Kyler Murray as his quarterback, and even the fact that if Kyler plays bad, they could go back to J.J. McCarthy. And if they go back to J.J. McCarthy, I feel even worse about Justin Jefferson's outlook. Good player, questions about his situation, comfortable taking him in the back half of the first round, not earlier than that. Next up, Drake London, kind of the same thing as Justin Jefferson, but to a lesser degree. He's a worse player, but I feel better about his quarterback situation. Not to say Drake London's a bad player. He's a good player, but you look at his quarterbacks, it's Tua and Michael Penix. Tua, I feel kind of good about Tua as Drake London's fantasy quarterback. I don't think Tua will win many games for the Falcons, but I do think Tua is competent enough to get the ball to Drake London, kind of like Kirk Cousins was, where Kirk Cousins, not a very good quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons, got the ball to Drake London. So in fantasy, it didn't really matter. But I am worried about, what if Tua starts to suck occasionally? What if he gets benched? What if Michael Penix comes in? What if Michael Penix sucks? And it's just quarterback situation again that's keeping me a little lower on Drake London, to where I'm like, this is a guy who I might take with my first round pick. I might wait to see if he falls back to me if I have a late first round pick, double back with him in the second round. He's a good player. Just like Justin Jefferson, questions with his quarterback keeps him from being a bona fide first-round pick in my eyes. Next up, Ashton Jeanty. The talent's there. The situation last year was awful. It kept him from being elite. But we've seen that even in an awful situation last year, he still, bullshitted his way to an RB1 overall finish, despite everything working against him. So coming into this year with improved quarterback play, improved O-line, there's no reason a much better offensive mind in Clint Kubiak calling the plays than, I don't even remember who the Raiders OC was last year, but he should be much better this year. And we predict that Ashton Jeanty is this elite running back talent. He went 6th overall in the draft for a reason. I'm perfectly fine in the first round betting on Ashton Jeanty, and if you are in a running back heavy league, I'm perfectly fine with Ashton Jeanty being considered like a first rounder. Like you saying, okay, I'm going to take Ashton Jeanty at 6th overall. Like I feel perfectly fine with that. But I think that if you want to be more conservative, the other guys I had in the last tier are safer bets because there's a chance that the wheels could come off. Maybe Ashton Jeanty isn't this elite prospect. Maybe he's just a pretty good prospect. And I do think that if you want to play it safe, maybe wait a year to see what Jeanty looks like behind a competent offensive line and go from there. But I believe in Jeanty, so I'm perfectly fine taking him as a first round pick, but there is a argument against that. And lastly, Devon Achane. He's a great player. Miami sucks. He's in quite possibly the worst offense in the National Football League. We have no idea what his quarterback Malik Willis is like. There are no receiving weapons in his offense. He is by far and away the best and only offensive weapon in the Miami Dolphins system, which means he's going to get game planned against all the time. And if they start stacking the box against him, we could very quickly see his rushing efficiency go way down. And if the Miami Dolphins aren't maintaining drives, we could very quickly see his opportunities per game going way down. And also, we may, no matter what, see his receiving production go down. Devon Achane has long been an elite receiving back in the fantasy football community, which has been bolstering his fantasy outlook. But now with Malik Willis at quarterback, Malik Willis is a rushing quarterback. He is more likely to, instead of throwing a check down like Tua used to Devon Achane, Malik Willis may just take off and vanish into the sunset. So we may see, regardless of Miami's offensive competency, we may see Devon Achane's targets go down, which would hurt his fantasy outlook. So I like Devon Achane, the player, really, really concerned about his offense. I feel like he has to be considered a borderline first rounder just because of the talent, but he's a guy who I personally don't think I'm touching in the first round and don't know if I'm even touching in the first part of the second round, just because I'm so down on Miami as an offense. Now we're going to move on to the second round. And the guys here, the first guys we're going to talk about are, in my opinion, the elite second rounders. These are the players who make up the bulk and the really good picks in the second round. Some of these guys, I think, are even fringe first rounders, where if you wanted to take them in the first round, I wouldn't think that's too crazy. One of those guys is the first guy on this list, Omarion Hampton. He's a Chargers running back. He's coming off of an okay rookie season where he was plagued by injuries. The Chargers offensive line was injured also, so that hampered his production. But even with that, all of those things working against him, he still had reasonably productive points per game numbers. He was pretty good in the games he played. The main thing holding him back from being a first round pick, in my opinion, although I do think he is the closest to being a first round pick out of the guys in this group, is just we haven't seen a lot out of him yet. Like I said, he only played a few games last year as a rookie, but I do think with a healthy offensive line and now the addition of Mike Macdonald as the Chargers offensive coordinator, I do think Omarion Hampton will have a very nice season. And he's a guy who, if I have the 11th or 12th pick in the first round, sometimes I'd be okay taking Omarion Hampton. But I also think that if you can get him as a second round pick, that's a great value. Also, the next guy and the only other guy who I think is a fringe first round pick is Saquon Barkley. I think that the regression last year was very predictable. You look at running backs who have had 350 touches in a season, and they've all essentially fallen off the next year just because of the strain that puts on their body. So I think the fall off for Saquon Barkley last year was entirely predictable and expected. But now with a year recovered and a new offensive coordinator who hopefully isn't as bad as their last one and entirely incompetent, it's perfectly reasonable to expect a bounce back for Saquon Barkley. Now, I do think the running backs and receivers I have ranked ahead of him are safer picks. Saquon does have a bit of an injury history, and we don't know what this Eagles offense is going to look like because there's once again a new offensive coordinator. You lose A.J. Brown. You're now relying on Devonta Smith and the rookie Mekhi Lemon to bolster the receiving game. Maybe this Eagles offense doesn't take as much of a step forward as we think they will, but I think that Saquon Barkley, now that he's a year removed from that really workhorse season in 2024, will be a perfectly reasonable pick. I like him a lot more as a second rounder than a first rounder, but I do think that he is one of the closer guys to being a first round pick. In the second round is where I start to think about taking a tight end. Brock Bowers and Trey McBride are both great picks in my opinion. I like elite tight end, especially just because of the positional value it offers. But I don't really think I want to take them with my first round pick. Between the two, I like Brock Bowers more than Trey McBride just because Trey McBride has to deal with Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. as target competition. He also has Jacoby Brissett as his quarterback. Somehow I feel better about the combination of Kirk Cousins and Fernando Mendoza as quarterbacks than I do about Jacoby Brissett slinging it 30 times again this season. I think Brock Bowers it will be a better tight end this season than Trey McBride. Still think Trey McBride's a great pick. Just if they're both on the board at the same time, I'm taking Brock Bowers. When it comes to these two guys, I really, as soon as it ticks into the second round, I'm kind of thinking about, do I want to just take one of these guys and lock up the tight end position? I think they're both basically just fat receivers, so there's no reason not to think of them as, elite receiving options, but some people don't like taking early tight end, and I understand that. However, I do think they both deserve to go in the second round, and if either one of them falls to the third round, I think that's an immediate smash. To round out this tier, we've got two receivers and a running back. We've got A.J. Brown, who moves from the Eagles to the Patriots. I think that he's just going to volume his way to being an elite fantasy receiver. We saw last year Stefon Diggs, a washed Stefon Diggs, still put up 1,000 yards and a semi-consistent fantasy season as Drake May's number one target. With a guy who's much more talented at this moment in their career than Stefon Diggs and A.J. Brown, I don't see any reason why A.J. Brown shouldn't finish as a borderline wide receiver one. And I think if things go really right, he can absolutely just be a top 5 wide receiver. Kind of the same thing for Chris Olave for me. We saw last year that even on a Saints team that had up and down quarterback play and with a rookie quarterback in Tyler Shuck getting his feet wet, Chris Olave was as consistent as he could come. He finished as a top 6 wide receiver. I'm not really too scared of the addition of Jordan Tyson. I think that Kellen Moore will want to throw the ball a lot this season, and I think Chris Olave should be a beneficiary of that. The only thing keeping Chris Olave back for me is just the possibility of Tyler Shuck taking a step back this season. Maybe he's not as good as we think he is, and also the long outstanding injury history Chris Olave has. But besides that, I don't see anything wrong with Chris Olave. I think he's got a premier position in the Saints offense. I'm not too scared of Jordan Tyson. I think Jordan Tyson might actually make things easier for Chris Olave by taking some heat off him. All in all, great player, good second round pick. Last but not least, Kenneth Walker. He goes from Seattle to Kansas City. He is just a guy who I think that you can very easily make the case for him to get so many touches and to be the featured weapon in the Chiefs offense, especially with Patrick Mahomes coming back from injury. I am concerned about Kenneth Walker's own injury history. He does have a long injury history in the NFL. I'm also concerned about the fact that despite the fact that we think Kenneth Walker's talented, we've never seen him really be an RB1. We've wanted him to be an RB1 in Seattle for so many years, but he just kept getting cucked by other guys. And I'm just worried that, we think this guy is going to be this great bell cow back, but what if Emmett Johnson, a rookie they drafted this year, just cucks him again like they did in Seattle? I'm just concerned about the fact that despite the talent, Kenneth Walker has never really been able to separate himself out as an RB1 and the injury history. He's a guy who I just feel a lot more comfortable in the second round. Think he'll still get a lot of touches. Think the Chiefs are going to use him heavily. Good pick overall. So following the elite second rounders are, surprise, surprise, the rest of the guys who I think should go in the second round. And I like these guys. It's just that I'm never taking them if an elite second rounder is still on the board. Because I think that there are bigger concerns or downside cases or cap ceilings for these guys compared to the other ones. In this tier, we've got Jeremiah Love, Rashee Rice, Derrick Henry, Chase Brown, and Josh Allen. I like Jeremiah Love. He's a rookie running back, drafted in the top 5. Historically, if you go back and look at the last 7 rookie running backs drafted in the top 5, they've all finished as RB1s. I expect Jeremiah Love to finish as an RB1. However, I think when he does, it'll probably be squeaking in as an RB1 as maybe the RB 9, 10, 11, something like that. I don't think he's going to be like Ezekiel Elliott or Saquon Barkley and immediately jump to being a top 5 running back. I think that the situation around him is holding him back. You look at this backfield and there's still James Conner in this backfield. If he's on the team come the start of the season, I expect him to get some run. You trade for Tyler Algier this offseason. He's a great running back. I expect him to get some run, especially on the goal line. And this is an offense that still, at the end of the day, is being run by Jacoby Brissett. And kind of like what I said previously with Trey McBride, I'm just a little concerned about the competency of this Cardinals offense. But I like the talent. He's a great player. He's got the draft capital that suggests that he will be a great player immediately. He's a guy who I would probably be more comfortable taking in the third round, but I understand if you want to take him in the second round. He's a guy who I might jump on next year. In 2027. But if you want to take him in 2026, I think he will have immediate fantasy value this year. Then comes Rashee Rice, and he, ignoring all the stuff that he seems to want to do off the field that prevents him from playing football, he's just in an offense that has no one else. There's no other receiving options in this Chiefs offense that I feel really confident about. Xavier Worthy has not shown to be more than a wide receiver 3. Travis Kelce's old and probably wants to retire after this year, so who knows how hard he's going to try. I just think that Rashee Rice is going to be the premier option. He's going to get all the targets from Patrick Mahomes. This is a Chiefs offense that's gotten the return of Eric Bieniemy as offensive coordinator. He masterminded all of Patrick Mahomes' elite seasons. I think we could very easily see a bounce back from Patrick Mahomes. Maybe not, a 50 touchdown season, but I think we could very easily see 30 touchdowns out of Patrick Mahomes this season. And if anyone's going to benefit from that, I think it's going to be Rashee Rice just because he's the best receiver. The knee stuff this offseason has me a little worried, and I like a lot of the receivers ahead of him as being more elite because their offenses, I think, are better as of now without projecting them to improve. But I like Rashee Rice as the premier option on the Kansas City Chiefs. Next up is Derrick Henry. I like Derrick Henry. I think he's still got some run in him. I'm not too worried about the age, but I'm still kind of worried about the age, and that's kind of what's keeping him from being an elite second rounder, in my opinion. He's just old, and I know he's Derrick Henry, and I know he's a freak of nature, and I know he's probably going to run for another 1,300 or 1,400 yards, but I'm just getting more and more worried every year because of the age. He's going to fall off eventually. It might not be this year. He's still in an offense with Lamar Jackson where they represent just an elite rushing threat that defenses have to always be aware of. And I think with the departure of John Harbaugh, that the Ravens won't forget to use him randomly in games where they end up losing, and instead Jesse Minter as their new coach will not be an idiot and will just remember we can just give the ball to Derrick Henry. But the age is a minor concern. Lamar Jackson's a concern because he's going to steal touchdowns. Good player. I feel a lot more comfortable in the back of the second round. The next guy's Chase Brown, and he's down here just because I don't think he's as good as a lot of the players I have ranked ahead of him. Chase Brown's a guy who has sort of been fantasy relevant, not because he's an elite talent, which he's just a good talent in my opinion, but because the Bengals seem to be completely disinterested in giving anyone else the ball. He is clearly the bell cow back in a elite offense, and because of that, he's going to be fantasy relevant. He's probably going to be a running back 1. I don't think he's going to be a top 6 running back, though, just because I don't think he's that good, and the Bengals like to throw the ball a lot. And there's always the risk of Joe Burrow getting injured, and that tends to derail the Bengals season completely. But, good player in an offense that really values him, going to lead to good fantasy numbers. The last guy in this tier, who I think is the last guy I would feel comfortable as my second rounder, is Josh Allen. I don't personally like taking high QB. I think you can get a lot more value on your fantasy team in terms of drafting skill players or an early tight end in the first 2 rounds, not a quarterback. But if you want to take Josh Allen, he's probably going to be the QB1. He's repped out like 4 straight QB1 seasons at this point. There's no reason to believe he's not going to be the QB1. So he's a good pick. I just think there's better value to be had by taking a wide receiver or running back in the first 2 rounds and then finding a later quarterback. But, Josh Allen is a great player, and he's an MVP. He leads the league in fantasy points every year. It is what it is. I mean, he's not a bad player, but I personally wouldn't take him. I struggled for a bit on what to call this last group, and I settled on fall off. And what I mean by that is these are the last guys where I feel really strongly that they could be wide receiver, running back 1s at their position. After this, you start to get into guys where I feel like you have to make but-ands to make the case for them to exceed their draft position. Like, you have to say, well, they could be a wide receiver 1, but their quarterback would need to take a step forward. Well, this guy could be a running back 1, but he might get overshadowed by some RB2 who's sitting behind him. But with these guys, I think you can very easily see the path forward for them to be elite fantasy options this year. Devonta Smith, first guy. A.J. Brown's out of town. Jalen Hurts has to throw the ball to someone. This guy was a Heisman winning receiver in college. It's a no-brainer pick. I think that he's criminally underrated, to be honest with you. I think that he could very easily just volume his way to a wide receiver 1 finish. I think he has a capped ceiling. I don't know if he's going to go ever in his career for 1,500 or 1,600 yards, but I think very easily he could put together a 1,300-yard, very nice season and be a guy who you're very happy is on your team because he's just consistently putting out good wide receiver 1 fantasy numbers. It's kind of the same thing for Emeka Egbuka. I think that he might have a higher ceiling later in his career. I think right now Chris Godwin may, despite the fact that Chris Godwin's old and injury prone, might keep him from evolving into an elite receiver at the time. But I still think that we saw at the beginning of last year what his upside could be, what his boom games could be. And I think that you can very easily attribute the fall off down the stretch of the season to him and his quarterback Baker Mayfield getting injured. Very easy to explain what happened there. I think he's a bona fide stud. I think he's a very easy guy where if you take 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds and you're doubling back in the 3rd round and you want to take him as your wide receiver 1, I don't think you feel, perfectly secure in it, but I think you feel decently happy with him as your wide receiver 1. Josh Jacobs, I know there's a bit of legal issues around him, but we haven't heard about that in a while, so I'm kind of assuming it's just going to disappear like it seems like some domestic things seem to happen with NFL players. He's a guy who we've seen a little bit of an efficiency fall off last year, but I do think he's very much a shut up and eat your broccoli kind of player where he's not flashy. I don't think he's finishing as a top 3 RB, but I think he could very easily finish as the RB8, and he's going as the RB18 at the moment, so I think that's a very, high upside pick that you can make. I think we've seen Josh Jacobs be elite. The Packers have no competition behind him. He just seems like a very safe, boring pick where if you need a running back, Josh Jacobs can be your man. It's kind of the same thing for Javonte Williams. The Cowboys have no backfield competition for him. Jaden Blue, I don't think will probably evolve to become a significant competitor for backfield touches. Javonte should continue to be the goal line guy, the every down guy. I think he's being held back by his lack of pass catching upside. I think that's one of the main things holding him back, especially in PPR leagues. But if you need a running back, just like Josh Jacobs, Javonte Williams feels like a very much shut up. He's going to be the RB9. Just take him. I know it sucks, but just take him. Your team needs him. He's going to be a solid running back for you. Ladd McConkey is a guy who I think people are underestimating how much his situation has changed since last season. I think the loss of Keenan Allen from the Chargers is going to prove to be very fruitful for Ladd. I think that the addition of Mike McDonald is going to, like I said, with Amari Hampton, boost this Chargers offense to heights we've never seen before. And all of that together will, in my opinion, lead to a very good season for Ladd McConkey. I think you can very easily project him becoming the standout wide receiver 1. I don't really think Quentin Johnston is a significant competitor. I think he'll take some receiving work, but I think Ladd will establish himself as the wide receiver 1. And once he does that, I think that in a Mike McDonald offense with Justin Herbert as the quarterback, what's stopping Ladd McConkey from being a low-end wide receiver 1? I don't think really anything. And lastly, Breece Hall. I know the Jets suck, but one thing that you got to remember that doesn't suck about the Jets is their offensive line's pretty good. And Geno Smith is not Justin Fields. Geno Smith is not going to be able to run. He's going to throw checkdowns to Breece Hall, which he's going to appreciate. Braylon Allen has proven finally that he just sucks. So I think Breece Hall is going to be the bona fide RB1. He's going to get all the significant touches, and I think that he could very easily just, bully his way to a decent RB finish. I think he's going to be held back by the Jets offense kind of being mid. But if Geno can revitalize his career a little bit, I think there's no reason Breece Hall can't be a low-end RB1 by the end of the season, just because he's such a talented player that I think he can overcome the shackles that are the Jets. So with this in mind, these are all the players who I think you need to be thinking about and deciding between in the first 3 rounds. After this, you kind of get into a fall off of players where you can start going your own path, looking at the way your team's been constructed through the first 3 rounds, what your needs are, start thinking about who you personally like, who you maybe have higher in your draft rankings and you want to take early, stuff like that. But these guys, I think, are the solidified elite of the elite, the players who need to come off the board before you start doing anything weird in your draft. But if you have a guy who you think I should have included in this list, let me know. You're wrong, but you can let me know. All right. Goodbye.